Welcome to Make Something with me, David Picciuto. Today we are going to make a picture frame sled. I made this sled 5 years ago and made a video on it, and there are some improvements that can be made. I've learned a few things. This has served me very well, but I just want to make a better one. I will go over some of those improvements here in a second, but I want to talk about why you would want a picture frame sled for the table saw instead of just cutting it at the miter saw. For picture frames, you need two things. You have to have miters that are a perfect 90 degrees, and you also have to have exact lengths on the parallel pieces, otherwise your frame is not going to go together very well, and that's where this sled comes in really handy. Yes, you can get perfect 45-degree cuts at the miter saw, and you can set up a stop system on the miter saw so you have exact lengths. But the great thing about this sled is it measures from the inside of the rabbet. Whatever the size of your artwork, that is where you set the stop. If you were going to do this at the miter saw, it gets a little bit more complicated. There's a math formula that you need to know. So if your board is 2 inches wide, the overall length is going to be a certain size, but same size artwork, if your board is only 1.5 inches wide, it's not going to be as long. This sled eliminates all of that. There's no math. You just set the stop for the size of your artwork. Doesn't matter the width of the piece. That's the really super cool thing about this sled, and it just makes picture frame making so easy. I used 1/2 inch plywood because I wanted to keep it light. Well, turns out that 1/2 inch plywood, it doesn't lay flat. So one side kind of went up a little bit. So we're going to use a better quality plywood that's a little bit thicker. Another thing is, and I modified this since that video, is I did this little T-track on the runner right here, because what I found was when I'm at the table saw and I had this all the way back, it wants to flip up and hit me in the face, and I found myself forcing this down the whole time. So having that T-track that goes into the miter slot in your table saw, no matter how far back it is, it doesn't want to flip up. So that was one thing that I modified that we're going to do today. It's a little bit longer than I need. I've never made a frame that is 34 inches long. So I'm going to shorten this up a little bit so the sled's a little bit more manageable. But as I shorten it up this way, I'm going to lengthen it this way, because what I found was a lot of times I'm cutting a board and there's no support out here and it wants to flip down. So I'm forcing myself to hold this down and run it through the blade, and that's a potential safety issue. It's also, if it tilts down a little bit and goes through the blade, I'm not going to get perfect miters. So those are the improvements that we're going to make. I'm going to grab some 3/4 inch Baltic birch plywood, the good stuff, and get started. So now that we got the base of the sled made, we need to make the runners that's going to go in the miter slots of the table saw. You can buy pre-made miter bars, and these are really cool because you can expand them to the exact width of your miter slot. Today, I'm going to make my own using some straight grain red oak. So we're going to sneak up on the cut until we get a really tight fit. Then we can finesse that fit later on. I also want to glue on a piece of 1/8 inch plywood on the bottom there to create this T, because my miter slots have like this T-track type thing. And what that's going to allow is what I mentioned earlier, is when it's in there, it doesn't want to flip back. I can just let go and it'll stay there. So now that fits in the slot. There's zero play in there. I can cut 2 pieces out of this. I have to keep in mind that this plywood is going to go in the T slot. This is going to go on top of that, and I can take a pencil and mark a line. So now we got both of those cut. They both fit into the miter slots. It is time to make the T part, and I'm just using 1/8 inch plywood. The width of this is going to be dependent on the size of the slot in your table saw. So I'm going to glue these guys together. So I'm going to throw in the 1/8 inch plywood into the table saw. Then we can drop that on top. And you do want to make sure that this does sit slightly below the table saw. That way the sled rests on the table saw top. So I'm just going to use CA glue because it dries really fast. And you don't even need a lot. And then I can just drop that right onto there. On the previous sled, I had that curve cut come right in at the corner, but because I want more to hang out up front for more support, I'm gonna come down here a little bit, mark my line, and this isn't necessary, but I'm just gonna draw that 45 on here, just so I can visually see where that's gonna go. So, to glue these on to this board, I need to throw them back in the miter slot, but I want them raised a little bit so it sticks up above the surface. So I'm going to throw in these pieces of cardboard, and that's just enough to keep it above the surface. I'm just going to kind of eyeball where that line is going to go. That's right where my blade is, and it's going to go right there. And the runner on this left side is going to be much longer than the runner on the right. That's going to be okay. This one of them just needs to be a guide for the other. So, but I do want to make sure it is sticking out there, sticking out here. I'm going to bring in this speed square, and this isn't super critical, but you want it really close to being 45 degrees. The reason this isn't critical is because the 90-degree guides that we have on here, that's the critical part. This just needs to be somewhat close, as close as you can get. Since my runners are oversized, I'm just gonna mark here. I know that one gets the full treatment. I can lift this up, and I know to put glue all along this one and right here. So again, we're going to use CA glue. This isn't sponsored, I promise, but this is my favorite CA glue. It is the Gorilla Glue. The reason is they have the best caps by far. All my other super glues and CA glues, the caps get glued on, they get chewed up. I have no affiliation with them, I promise you, but this is my favorite glue just because the caps always come on and off so easily. Check this out. This one has the cap, and then it also, look at that, it's got a brush. You kidding me right now? You kidding me right now? We are going to set this back on here. I can see my pencil line right there, so I know it's going to drop in right about here. Again, make sure I'm square. I'm just going to throw a weight on there and let that dry. That's probably dry. It's been sitting for about 5 minutes. And hopefully this slides out. That CA glue isn't very strong, so we are going to drill holes and put some screws in here just to make sure that never moves. Putting those screws in there, probably going to expand that red oak in there just a little bit, and that's going to make that fit maybe a little bit tight. That is okay, because we can come back with some sandpaper and finesse that for the perfect fit. And now I need to mark where we want the screw holes to go. So I'm going to use my speed square again, and I'm just going to mark the outside of that miter slot. Actually, we can do this. I can pre-drill right down the center. This bit that I have in here, this comes from Make It Snappy, but it drills the hole and then also drills this little countersink at the same time. So you do want to make sure the screws are below the surface so they don't interfere with anything. And just as I suspected, it's a little tight. It's like putting on a fresh pair of pants right out of the dryer. They're going to be a little tight. It's going to loosen up over time. You can take some sandpaper in there, finesse that a little bit, and then we're also going to wax this at the very end so it slides and glides nice and smooth. Oh, you're recording this? I noticed that I had a little gap in here, so I backed the screws off a little bit, and now, like an animal, I'm on top of my table saw doing silly stuff. I sanded a little point on there because I was having a little bit of trouble getting it started, finding its home. that definitely makes it a lot easier. And we got some, we do have a little bit of finessing to do. So we're gonna sand inside here, wax these runners. What we're gonna do different this time is I'm going to use an aluminum square. The last time we just used one long aluminum rule that we cut a 45 on. This is already a perfect 90. Now I went with the more expensive Milwaukee one because it's red. But trust me, you can use the cheaper ones and go to Harbor Freight or get the Empire ones from wherever. You can use the cheaper ones. You just have to make sure that it is aluminum and not the steel, because you can cut aluminum with woodworking blades, but you cannot cut steel. I'm going to start my curve cut and then find that point where that is going to be, and then we're going to lock this down on here. And I know I need to make my curve cut at least to about right there. I'm going to go a little bit past that point. We need to attach this to this, but we do need to raise it up just a little bit. We're going to use the same 1/8 inch plywood as we use for the T-slot runners. On the short side, that little spacer can be any size. On the long side, you can see my spacer is not as wide as the rule because I need this lip here for the stop that we're going to make in a little bit. So right now we're going to mix up the epoxy. I got mine roughly the same width, although I do not want it sticking out that way at all because that's going to ruin my squareness of the square. It is time to attach the square. Eventually we'll chop that off, and I'm going to pre-drill some holes into this aluminum. And then I think these are machine head screws. These happen to be the stainless, and then we'll use that to attach it to the sled. Over here, I just got lucky enough where there's already some holes in there and I can just use those. So I'm going to drill over here. Once I line up that point to where I want it, I can take this and I can square up this. If this is 1 degree off, it doesn't matter because this is 90 degrees. So if one cut is 40 degrees and the other cut is 50 degrees, you're still going to have a perfect picture frame. And nobody's going to know. Still square. And I'm going to go ahead and make a cut into here. This has to be aluminum because you can drill aluminum easily, and you can also cut aluminum with your table saw with a woodworking blade. You can't do that with steel. I have a saw stop. This aluminum could trip the trigger and the saw stop. If you don't know, a saw stop, it detects flesh, and if it detects flesh, a brake slams up on the blade, pulls it underneath the table in a fraction of a second, and it's nearly impossible to cut your fingers off. But this aluminum may trip that trigger, so I need to turn the brake off to do this. If you don't have a saw stop, that's all you need to do. You don't even have to go all the way through, because when you have your picture frame on there, it's only going to hang over a 1/4 of an inch, 3/8 of an inch, 1/2 inch or so. So because I do have a saw stop, I actually need to remove more material on both sides. I'm actually going to come all the way through, take this off, and then shave off a little bit. That way the blade can never touch this, so it doesn't trip the trigger. You don't have a saw stop, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Digital angle gauge. So I'm going to set that on there, and I will zero it out, and we're going to see what we got here. What's that say, Dan? 90. So something that I like to do just to make sure the boards don't slide on here as I'm cutting them is some adhesive back sandpaper. You could just get regular sandpaper and you'd spray adhesive for this. That will also work, because this stuff can be a little costly. So I just ripped this board, and now I need to cut a 45, and I was getting ready to do it at the miter saw, and Dan's like, you could just use the sled you just made to cut 45s. So mind blown. So I'm just gonna hold this up against here, and I'm going to run this through the blade to get a nice 45-degree cut on there. So now we need to create a little lip that's going to wrap around the rule. That's why we raise the rule. I've got my blade set to the depth of that lip, and I've marked this out where I need to cut it, and it's probably going to take 2 passes because this rule looks thicker than 1/8. So I'm going to run this through, nudge the fence over, and run it through again until it fits on there. So that fits in there. So now I need to put a little toggle clamp on there. So now we're going to use a toggle clamp to lock this stop into place. I got this toggle clamp from Harbor Freight. I did notice that they have greatly improved their toggle clamps over the last couple years. Their old ones were crap. This one is much higher quality. The one problem you may run into is the bolt that comes with it might not be long enough to reach over everything. So I went to the hardware store. I just got a longer bolt. And then this longer bolt does not have this rubber foot. So I'm just going to take one of these clear bumpers, screw it on the bottom of that, and then we screw this toggle clamp into place here. So now I'm going to show you how to use this sled. I have this artwork from my buddy Jim Ether. It measures 9 inches by 10 inches. I'm going to assume that you already have your board with the rabbet cut in there. You can make that rabbet at the table saw or the router. I've got basic picture frame making videos if you need to go check that out. That rabbet fits over the lip on the sled. If you were doing this without the sled over at the miter saw, you would have to use that formula we talked about earlier to figure out the length of the cut, because that length is going to vary depending on the width of your board. But because this sled measures from inside the rabbet, we don't have to worry about that. That is the beautiful thing about this sled. I'm going to slide the stop over so that intersection is right at 9 inches. And then just go slightly bigger just to give it a little bit more room for the artwork. And then I can lock that down. You will always start on the left side of the jig, my left, your right, and make that first cut. And then we can take that miter, butt it up against our stop, and cut one more time for that perfect length. And now we'll repeat for the parallel piece. So now we have 2 pieces that are the exact same length. Now we're going to do the exact same thing for the 2 10-inch pieces. So I'm just going to move my stop over to 10 inches. So now it's time to glue this up. As long as your table saw blade was at a perfect 90 degrees and your square was at a perfect 90 degrees, this should glue up perfectly. I'm going to use my picture frame glue up jig. I've got a video on this. You might want to check this out. This makes gluing up picture frames quick and easy. The great thing about this, I can see my joints. I can make sure that they are level, and I can clean all the glue squeeze out after I get this clamped up. So get that out of the way. And that's going to drop in there. Get in there. And then this fits in there like that. A perfect fit, perfect miters. You will want to strengthen these joints right here, because if you drop this right now, probably break apart. And you're probably not going to drop your picture frame on the floor. You're just going to hang it up on the wall. But that is end grain to end grain glue ups. And as that wood expands and contracts over the years, it's going to weaken that joint. Eventually it'll split apart. I've got a brand new video on a spline making jig on how to reinforce that. And if you don't want to see a spline on there, I show another way on how to strengthen that with a dowel on the back. So check out that video. It's a 4-part video series. We got the video on the clamp, we got the video on the sled, we got the video on the spline jig, and then I got a general picture frame making video that goes into great detail about things that we talked about here, as well as mounting and matting and glass cutting. You want to check all those videos out. Before we go, I want to show you one more thing that I added to the jig since making this. I added one more toggle clamp to the sled because I found when I have like 6-foot long boards and I'm trying to cut this piece right here, this is what happens. Even though I made this sled with more support here, those longer boards still want to fall off. So I can throw this in there and then clamp that down. Unlike this toggle clamp where I had to put a longer bolt on here, I had to shorten this one to make clearance. All I did was just sand this tip down right here. If you don't want to use a toggle clamp, you could put a T-track in there and then put one of these guys on there. I have plans for this jig at my website at makesomething.com. That's going to wrap it up. We'll see you next time with a brand new project. As always, be safe, have fun, stay passionate, and make something.